Welcome back to Scary Animal Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the border between Nepal and northwestern India. On the eastern edge of the Indian province of Uttarakhand, the Himalayas lay out the northern border and provide the slope that jungle and fields cling to. The name of this province means the land of the gods and fits the topic of this episode. This province showcases over 34,000 square kilometers of forested land. The plant life in this area is very diverse, as there are 520 species of plants and 498 of them are flowering plants. Areas range from alpine and temperate rainforests featuring pines and hardwoods to lower areas featuring more tropical plants. The animal life here is as diverse as any on the planet, with smaller felines like the jungle cat, fishing cat, and leopard cat prowling the ground, and larger cats like leopard and tiger pursuing larger prey animals. Sloth, brown, and Asiatic black bear can be found here as well, creating a very broad spectrum of animals. The smaller animals are so abundant that we are not even going to list them here for the sake of time. Our story really begins just across the border in Nepal. In the western province of Sudur Pashchim, the Nepalese army gathered to confront a tiger that was terrorizing local villagers. The tiger had killed 200 people so far, and they had to do something to keep it from killing more, so they rounded up the army and began a drive to comb it from the cover. As they chased the tiger, it fled into the Indian province of Uttarakhand and out of their jurisdiction and became the problem of the Indian government. Upon arriving in Uttarakhand, the tiger proceeded to kill and eat humans and increased its tally to 440 people before the Indian government commissioned a reactive force. Eddie Knowles was chosen to pursue and dispose of the tiger as he was from a well-known sporting family. Eddie's family was wealthy and enjoyed the game hunting the area had to offer. He was skilled, but after 4 years the tiger still prowled the forests and seemed to pick victims at will and urge, without impedance. Jim Corbett was an Indian-born British hunter who was asked to kill the man-eater and bring confidence back to the countryside. Jim ordered that all bounties on the tiger be canceled and all bounty hunters be removed from the jungle as he pursued the man-eater. He and his support crew began heading to the area of Pali, a village of 50 total occupants, soon thereafter. A woman had recently been stalked and killed there, and they figured it would be a great starting point in their hunt. When Jim and his hunting party arrived in Pali, villagers were hiding in their houses and terrified. They'd been locked up in a self-imposed sequester for 5 days. The tiger had been seen and heard roaring all around the village as it claimed a domain and dominance in the area. The villagers informed Corbett that the tiger was known to walk along the road near the village, so he decided to sleep outside near it to try to ambush the predator. The moon lit the road and scattered shadows agitated by the breeze, causing imagined monsters as Jim spent a very unwise and second-thought restless night among the huts of the village. When the tiger didn't show itself the first night, Jim invited the villagers to take him into the jungle and try to confront the tiger on its own turf. The villagers refused and relayed the story of its latest victim to him. Apparently the woman was part of a small group sent to gather oak leaves in the forest for food for cattle. They'd gone about a half a mile into the jungle and climbed the trees to gather the leaves. The tree that enticed them stood alongside a shallow ravine. While the women were distracted with gathering leaves, the tiger had used the ravine to sneak up on the woman and hid itself behind a large boulder. It watched the women in the tree until one of them started to climb down. Just as she was a few feet from the ground, it snatched her by rising up from the ravine and pulling her down by her foot. As she collapsed into the ravine, it crushed her neck and dragged her into the jungle. The rest of the leaf-picking party watched as the woman was snatched and they ran back to the village. Upon hearing of the attack on the woman, the men of the village led a group of people armed with pots to clang and drums to bang to drive the animal away, as the women followed, contributing their own ruckus to frighten the beast. As soon as the group approached the attack site, they were terrified to hear a loud roar from the ravine just 30 yards away. Some of the men scattered in fear and ran back to their village. The sole armed man fired a shot into the air, which caused the enraged tiger to emerge from cover. After listening to the villagers' account of the attack and its aftermath, Corbett spent 3 hours following the tracks and sign through the forest. The villagers asked him to set out guards to allow the villagers to harvest their wheat crops. They quickly and nervously harvested what they could of their grain all in one day. Villagers also utilized the feeling of safety to catch up on neglected cleaning duties around the village and cleaned up the common yard. They were still too afraid to show him where the tiger was in the jungle, and he had to hunt despite a lack of knowledge of the species of the animal he was pursuing. The villagers informed Jim that just up the hill there were plenty of mountain goats, and he decided to kill a few for food for them and the hunters. Jim fired a Martini Henry rifle, which was a larger bore rifle suitable for many forms of animals found in the jungle, even a tiger. This was definitely classic mountain goat country, with jutting rocks and ravines rising at random intervals. The first goat he saw he killed, and it tumbled down the hill, alerting nearby goats which fled toward Corbett and his crew. He dropped another 2 goats in the resulting confusion. The villagers were in awe at the power and productivity of the rifle and retrieved their harvest gleefully. After witnessing the mountain goat harvest, the villagers now had full confidence in Jim and his hunting party's abilities. Jim gathered an entourage to once again investigate the site of the woman's attack. Once at the site, Corbett observed that the tiger came from a specific direction and discerned that the tracks were from a tigress who was older and possibly in desperate health. He could see that the woman's skin from the palm of her hands was still hanging from the tree bark in a testimony to her desperate attempt to prevent the tiger from killing her. There was a pool of blood a few yards away from the tree, an obvious sign of a struggle. The blood trail now turned into a drag trail, which left the ravine just above the attack site. The party gathered up a few remaining bone fragments of the woman for the cremation ceremony according to the local cultural practices and returned to the village. They then headed out to another attack site not far away. The tiger had ambushed a man's wife and began dragging her off into the jungle for 100 yards. Her sister pursued the tiger while it carried her sibling away and was trying to scare the tiger off when it turned and chased her down the hill. The woman who escaped was so terrified by the event that she lost her ability to speak for 12 months. Upon seeing Jim, the woman blessed him by stooping and touching his feet as a gesture of gratitude. The vastness of the area stymied Jim's confidence and success. Jim toured the area villages and canvassed the occupants to find out if they had seen the tigress. On a few occasions, Jim had been close to killing a few of the local man-eaters, but they stayed in cover, preventing him from doing so. The tigress had apparently left the area, so Jim decided to move on to Champawat, just 15 miles away. A woman was collecting dry sticks for a fire when she was ambushed by the tigress in Champawat. When 20 men were going to the local market, called a bazaar, they heard the screams of a woman. Then they saw the tigress holding the woman by the flesh of her back as she screamed aloud to God and man for help as she beat her chest in terror. Her screams eventually faded as she was killed while the men did nothing to help her. She was covered in blood and obviously fatally wounded, so the men knew they could not save her. A rescue party of 60 people set out to recover her. A couple of 100 yards from where she was gathering sticks, they found her torn and bloody clothes. The members of the party started beating their drums and firing their firearms as they proceeded following the trail. As they followed the trail, they eventually came to her body, laid out on a large flat rock. Her body was licked clean of blood and nude, but otherwise unconsumed. The men attempted to preserve her virtue by covering her as they reclaimed her body and brought it back to the village. The burdensome weight of having a man-eater lurking nearby weighed heavily on all of the people. The villagers encouraged Jim to move a bit further away to a bungalow near a spot where many people had been killed. Once he was there, 2 men showed up and informed him that a cow had been killed at a village just 10 miles away. The hunters departed for the area immediately and discovered it was a calf that had been killed by a leopard and not a tiger. Jim returned to the bungalow to meet again with one of the leaders, but he had not returned. The villagers decided to take Jim to a known watering hole for the tiger where he observed its tracks. He returned to the bungalow and met with the community leader who had arrived. After conversing with the leader, Jim was surprised to hear him announce that he would return in the dark instead of staying the night as he'd previously stated he would. The next day, Jim was speaking with the leader, who had returned after finishing business in Champawat. They saw a man quickly approaching in alarm. Jim quickly excused himself and walked toward the man. The man's news was that the tiger had returned and killed a young woman. Jim gathered his arms and provisions and rounded up his men. The messenger led the group toward the kill site. Corbett then began gathering insights regarding the attack. A witness indicated that there was a group of young people gathering sticks under a tree when the attack occurred. Once the young woman was snatched, the rest of her party ran back to the village. The witness pointed out the tree under which the attack was made, and Jim began approaching while analyzing the sign and terrain. The terrain was mostly open and should have allowed the group of 12 people to see the tiger as it closed in on them. At the attack scene, Jim observed a large pool of blood and beautiful blue beads that the girl wore. Along the tiger's tracks were patches of blood, and her clothes were found along the trail. The girl's long raven hair was shed on thorns along the path. One of the villagers had defied Jim's orders to stay at the village and crept up behind him as he stalked the tiger. Jim ordered the man to remove his heavy boots and stay close as they made their way through the foliage. Jim continued to follow the blood trail down the hill through rough terrain and hostile plant life. The man accompanying Jim began to get very nervous as his voice strained in their conversation. The man decided to climb a nearby boulder and seek safety, as opposed to continue to follow Jim and the tiger through the bushes. As Jim approached the tiger, now hauling its kill, he pushed her by getting too close to her, and she moved her meal to another location. He found the tiger's tracks with bone splinters near the creek. He found a severed human leg, bitten off just below the knee with apparently one clean bite, and still trickling blood. Overwhelmed by a sense of impending danger, Jim glanced around and observed some dirt tumbling down a nearby embankment, belying the tiger's recent escape. Jim sprinted up the bank and grabbed some tangled plants to steady himself. Once he gathered himself, he could see the plant life righting itself from the tigress passing through it. He followed the tracks and blood trail through a dangerous and unstable rock field. He continued to track the tiger from diminishing blood trail to diminishing blood trail, while maintaining a wary eye for her whereabouts. He could hear her growling a short distance away and attempt to intimidate him from continuing his pursuit. He sped up her pursuit, and this seemed to settle her growling as she realized it gave her location away. Jim decided to return for the night and buried the severed leg for recovery later for burial ceremonies. He picked up the man on the boulder as he returned. Jim knew that the tigress consumed the rest of the young woman and would sleep for the next day. He knew he would need an organized event called a beat. This is when the villagers would string a fabric in a huge circle or line that tigers will for some reason not pass. Between the din made by the people and the presence of the solid piece of cloth, tigers magnanimously run away from the line of beaters. Then they would begin beating drums and pots and then close in the circle or the line while moving the cloth into a tighter and tighter area, eventually trapping the tiger. After observing the terrain, Jim decided they could set up a line of beaters and drive toward a gorge, which he believed the tiger would enter to try to escape through. He had local leaders gather a big group of beaters and rested for the night. Jim arrived at the beat location an hour early and made sure to look over the area and how his plan would work out. He felt good about the plan, and eventually 290 men showed up for the beat. Jim set the beaters out according to his plan and established the plan and roles for them. He instructed the men not to leave until he came and relieved them from their assignment. Jim then scrambled across the valley to the mouth of the ravine, where he expected the tiger to emerge from. For some reason, the beaters started the beat before Jim gave the signal, and he had to hurry into his position. The beaters were disorganized as they proceeded across the hill. The men yelled and clamored around the hill in complete chaos. The tiger appeared briefly, but one of the village leaders accompanying Jim prematurely fired his double-barrel shotgun, and Jim squeezed off a parting shot in the tiger's direction, causing the beaters to begin celebrating, even though the man-eater was not dead yet. Just then the tigress sprang from Jim's left, and he quickly fired at her. He was certain he missed her, as she paused in her tracks and briefly stared at him. He did hit her, but too far back, and immediately chambered another round and fired again. The tigress lowered her head and bared her teeth as Jim prepared for her to charge him. He had only brought 3 cartridges and now had fired 2. The tigress turned away and crossed a stream and easily navigated the adjacent hill along a ledge. She climbed to a projecting rock as Jim yelled for the leader to bring him his gun. Jim ran over and grabbed the gun from the leader as he wouldn't move and headed back after the tigress. The tigress emerged at the protruding rock and revealed herself for a shot. Jim fired and hit the tigress in the paw, but she was in her death throes already, and he didn't know it. She collapsed and breathed her last on the edge of the protruding rock. The beaters began shouting how they wanted to hack her to bits, surprising Jim and bringing him back to awareness of them. The beaters quickly approached with rusty swords, sticks, and other weapons. The men, now enraged at the sight of their torturer, felt their anger subside at the sight of her body and the end of their source of fear and terror. The beaters carefully lowered the tigress from the rock and brought her back to the village. Jim recalled as he observed her before she died on the rock that her mouth was disfigured. Her upper right canine was broken in half, and her lower right canine was broken completely off. This injury clearly prevented her from killing her normal prey and caused her to focus on human prey. The tiger was loaded onto a tote to carry it back to the village past the strands of hair from its last kill, still in the thorns. Villagers and nearby occupants lit the evening with torches as they approached the presentation of the tigress's body. The villagers processed bits of the tiger into charms to give the wearer courage and prevent wild animal attack. The fingers of the girl were given to Jim after extraction from the tigress's stomach, and he buried them in his own personal ceremony and tribute. The villagers rejoiced as they could now once again travel their roads and paths in safety, and bid him farewell. Jim took with him the tigress's pelt and head as a keepsake. He presented the pelt to the woman who could not speak from the prior attack. At the sight of the tigress's pelt, she regained her ability to speak and began yelling and shouting for joy. Thank you for watching Scary Animal Attacks. Please consider liking and commenting on our video if you like it, and share it to your social media. Clicking the bell will make sure you get notified when we post. And whatever you do, make sure to be safe out there, because you don't want to end up on an episode of Scary Animal Attacks. Welcome back to Scary Animal Attacks. This week's episode takes us to the dense arboreal forests of the taiga of the Russian Far East. A province named Primoria features a rolling topography with the world's largest undammed river, the Amur River. The wildlife of the area is a murderer's row of some of the most dangerous predators on Earth. Carnivores, like the Amur brown bear that grows to enormous size. Timber wolves, which have been known to pack up to packs numbering 20 individuals. The Amur leopard, or snow leopard, which hunts among the crags and cliffs. Wolverines, which will fight any animal that crosses its path, and the largest killer cat in the world, the Siberian tiger. These predators feed on the caribou, moose, elk, and deer, as well as the very dangerous wild boar. Judging by the panel of dangerous animals, it's amazing that there are people who scrape out a living here. In the depths of the winter of 1997, poacher Vladimir Markov was going poaching and loading up his gear to travel to his remote cabin. He spent a lot of time there, as employment is very hard to come by, but a brave and resourceful man can hunt, fish, and trap enough to survive. Markov gave his wife a kiss goodbye and had his friend drive him away from his home in Luchigorsk and down about 50 miles of the roughest road imaginable. Markov and his friend packed his supplies into the cabin as he was preparing to settle down for the night to go hunting in the morning. The next morning, Markov woke up early and grabbed his gun as he headed out of the door. The temperatures were well below zero, but he was used to it. He and his dogs were not hunting anything in particular, but what they wanted most was anything he could sell in the black markets. This could be meat from deer or boars, or pelts from wolves, leopards, or even tigers. Tigers and leopards are protected by law, but yield an enormous amount of money on the Chinese markets to the south. As Markov led his dogs through the forest on foot, they came across a huge track of a male Siberian tiger. This was the opportunity he'd been hoping for. The pack followed the tracks for a few miles as it meandered through the thick brush and over hills. As the group tracked the giant cat, they could see its tracks in the snow as it pursued wild boar, and knew they must be close to it. The dogs bayed and barked as Markov approached the end of the trail. He could see the muscles ripple across the shoulders of the cat as it leaned over its recent kill and glared at the man, demonstrating it was not about to relinquish its kill. Markov raised his shotgun and fired at the cat. He was a sure shot, as his livelihood depended on it, and the cat flashed through the white birch forest as it disappeared from his view. He was certain he had mortally wounded the tiger, and now had a bonus he would also glean. He walked over to the boar that the tiger was feeding on and began cutting himself some of the fresh meat. Markov salvaged a good amount of meat from the boar carcass and turned his attention to the tiger, which he was sure would be lying dead over the hill. He found the cat's enormous tracks in the snow and began following each step as he found it. Some blood here, a track there. The fresh snow made it easy, but he noticed that as he followed, the blood trail seemed to decrease. As he followed the tracks for a few miles, the blood in the tracks stopped, and he realized he would not be able to catch up to the tiger if it wasn't mortally wounded. Disappointed, he redirected his travel back toward his cabin and the warmth therein. He would feed his dogs and himself some of the salvaged meat and hunt again the next day. When he gets back to his cabin, he takes one of the haunches from the boar and put it in the wellhead of his beehive, and takes the other to town to see what he can trade for it. He trades for some needed supplies for his camp and some more ammunition for his shotgun, and makes it back to his cabin just before sunset. While Markov was in town, the wounded tiger returned to his boar kill and smelled the scent of the man and his dogs, and also noticed that most of his kill was taken. Using his keen sense of smell, he follows the tracks of the man for quite a while, and a few hours into the dark of the night finds the cached hind haunch from his kill, which Markov stored in the beehive wellhead. The tiger destroys the wellhead out of frustration and reclaims his boar meat. He drags it off a short distance and eats it a little ways from the cabin. The tiger's not happy with how events transpired, and is not satisfied with the fact that he got his meat back. He silently pads down to the cabin and walks around it, carefully analyzing the situation. Markov's dogs bark incessantly, and he realizes something is going on outside. Markov waits for some time to get a good look at the cat, and decides to solve this problem with a well-placed shot. Markov grabs his gun and calls his dogs into the cabin. His cabin is set up with shooting ports that allow him to put his gun barrel through the wall and shoot to the outside, sort of like a hunting blind. He points his shotgun through the shooting port and fires at the tiger. The giant cat disappears into the forest once again, having been wounded twice now by the same man. The next day, Markov is unnerved by the fact that the tiger showed up at his cabin and wouldn't leave. It clearly reclaimed the hind haunch from the wild boar and still came to his cabin afterward, so its behavior was not about food. These details sent him into a psychological tailspin. In the Far East, tigers are believed to have a vengeful and calculating aspect to their behavior. Locals believe that they hold grudges and exact revenge long periods of time after events. Markov decides he must leave the taiga and departs to his friend's cabin to catch a ride back to town and safety. At his friend Duncha's house, Duncha tries to convince him to stay at his cabin for the night, as the radiator fluid has been drained from the vehicle. This must be done each night as the temperatures are too cold to leave it in. Markov finds his resolve and decides against staying with his friends and waiting. He decides to head back to his cabin and deal with this tiger the only way he knows, by shooting it and killing it. While Markov was gone, the tiger gained entry to his cabin by demolishing the door. The man's scent was everywhere in the cabin, and the cat chewed, clawed, and bit anything that smelled like him. The tiger finds a metal water drinking ladle and flattens it, and puts canine tooth-sized holes in the cup part. The tiger shreds, splinters, and destroys any of the man's tools and possessions he finds outside. After he finished ransacking the cabin, he finds a well-hidden spot and lays in wait for Markov over the trail to the cabin. As the now resolved Markov approaches his own cabin in the dark, the tiger ambushes him from a well-hidden blind beneath a low-hanging spruce bough. The fight, if you can call it that, didn't last long. Investigators would find a horrid scene, with the surrounding snow covered in blood at the nexus where tiger and man's tracks met. A single dog leg protrudes from the snow. The snow had been stomped down into a circle and melted off, with a human femur picked clean of flesh in the middle of it. A bloody drag trail leads to another cleared-out circle, in which they found the rest of Markov. His boots and bloodied clothes still held their respective body parts. Severed arms still clothed by the sleeves. Feeding on the man pacifies the tiger for a few days, then it leaves. The tiger heads downstream over the next few days, moving slowly from its now infected injuries. As it approaches a small camp that Markov frequented, it smells his scent on the outhouse and splinters the entire building, further injuring itself. The villagers have now heard about this tiger, and the taiga is empty of the poachers and miners and lumberjacks. The only exception to this void of humanity is a 25-year-old trapper named Andrei Pachitnya. Andrei's parents forbade him from checking his traps until the tiger was caught or killed, but he was bold to the point of foolishness. He had arrived on his trap line and checked a few traps before returning to his cabin to cook lunch. A mile and a half away, the tiger smells Andrei and breaks into a nearby cabin. He trashes this cabin, just like he did to Markov's. Anything that smells like a human, he claws, bites, or breaks. The tiger takes the mattress from the bed and carries it out into the snow. The tiger carefully lays the mattress out in a hidden ambush spot and lays down on it to wait above the trail leading to the cabin. Andrei was not unprepared to check his traps and left his cabin with his rifle for protection. It was a Mosin Nagant rifle, nearly 100 years old. Siberian winters are very hard on anything that rusts, but they're very hard on ammunition as well. The temperatures drop so low that the air inside the bullet casing can sweat inside the round. In one season of winter, this can ruin or render unreliable all ammunition a trapper possesses. As Andrei approached his neighbor's cabin en route to check his traps, he was ambushed by the tiger from his resting spot atop the mattress from a distance of only 10 yards. The young man had quick reflexes, though, as he was able to quickly pull his rifle from his shoulder strap and put it to his shoulder to fire. The only problem was the ammunition was corrupted, and the bullet did not fire. The tiger did not die. The rifle misfired when the young trapper needed it most. Andre's father rounded up a search team to find his son, and soon located the ambush site, which was bloodless. The tiger broke the young man's neck without shedding any of his blood. His father picked up the rifle and confirmed the misfired cartridge and threw the gun into the river. The drag trail away from the kill site was 50 yards and went into some trees. The sight the men witnessed next was tragic, especially to the young man's father. Andre's entire existence had been reduced to his shirt and pants, with his boots covered with his blood. His crucifix lay atop the snow nearby. The tiger fed on him for 3 days and consumed nearly every bit of Andre. What was recovered could fit in a large shirt pocket. The men collected the scant remains and returned to inform his mother. Project Tiger is a group of tiger researchers and enforcement officers funded by Western conservation groups, and they operate something like park rangers, but without a park. They set up checkpoints and information hubs to let the locals know about the tiger and how to stay safe. They assembled a professional hunting team of 6 men to start tracking the tiger and save human lives. In early December, the hunters tracked the limping tiger tracks to Andre's cabin, where they could see everything was in a shambles. The tiger had repeated his venting on anything that smelled human and splintered tools and accommodations alike. From there they followed him through the mountains and observed his tracks as he pursued game time after time with no success. The head tracker's name was Yuri Trush, and he was flanked by officers Shibnev and Pionka. The hunters had noticed the tracks of 5 other tigers in the area, but the large male they were following had a tail in his track. His wounded right foreleg had stopped bleeding now, but he was carrying it, so his tracks would show only 3 legs and unusually large paw prints. The hunters followed the tiger as he hunts his way back into a more remote area near a cabin of a man called Shlemenko. As the hunting party enters a clearing near the cabin, a deafening roar rattles the bones of the men. Officer Trush turns toward the area emanating the roar to see the giant cat leap toward him from about 20 feet away. During the adrenalized slow-motion moment, Trush sees the intense, angry look in the tiger's eyes focused like lasers on him. Its paws are outstretched toward him, and he can even see the extended razor-sharp claws reaching out toward him. Pionka and Shibnev had spread slightly ahead of Trush just before the ambush. All 3 men shouldered their rifles and commenced firing as the tiger was flying through the air toward Officer Trush. The cat's open jaws and paws could not be stopped as the tiger plowed into Trush, sending the large man into a backward somersault. Trush had managed to get off 2 shots from his rifle while the cat was closing in on him, and the other 2 officers pumped out 11 shots total. Trush had deep gashes on his back, thigh, and arm from the impact of the vengeful tiger, but the giant was dead. He picked himself up from the snow and was completely confused by the speed of the attack and had no idea where his rifle had gone. As the men approached the tiger, incredibly they could see that Trush's rifle had actually gone down the throat of the charging tiger and was partially protruding from its mouth as it lay dead. The dead tiger was loaded into a vehicle and taken back to the village to assuage fears. The cat was emaciated with a giant head. The men skinned the tiger and could see where the cat was wounded by more than Markov's 2 shots. The tiger had been wounded several other times, and even carried several lead balls from the larger shot embedded in its flesh. The tiger was just reaching maturity and would later be stuffed and displayed at the administrative headquarters back in Luchakorsk. Welcome back to Scary Animal Attacks. Please take time to like and share today's video if you enjoy it, and post it to your social media to let others know of our educational and entertaining channel. Today's episode takes us to the primitive and lush jungles of the Sundarbans near the Bay of Bengal in western India. The Sundarbans are a mangrove wilderness featuring closed and open mangrove forests, mud flats, barren land, as well as agricultural land local farmers use for subsistence farming. The area has a broad diversity of wildlife and is struggling to maintain the balance between the demands of mankind and nature. The area is dotted with tidal streams and canals that routinely flood and subside with the tide. The ground is almost always wet and muddy, so navigation requires a boat. The Sundarbans are an area that is protected from human encroachment for the most part. There is limited hunting or fishing in the area, but that doesn't always stop scofflaws or bandits. Many locals ignore the laws to gather crabs or fish for their own income without bothering to purchase a license. These kinds of people are not on the authorities' radar as they are unexpected to traverse the area. Ideally, travelers to the area would purchase a license or permit, and authorities would be made aware of where they are planning on going. Consequently, they know where and when to search for them if they overstay their plans. The subjects of our episode today are Sushil and his son Jyotish, as well as Sushil's adopted daughter Malina. The trio made plans to venture into the Sundarbans to a great spot for crab. They left at the break of dawn for a preserve called Kalakali, a place in which fishing is banned. As they labored to paddle upstream, the sunlight grew brighter as the forest grew darker. 40-year-old Jyotish sat at the front of the boat to help navigate. Then 62-year-old Sushil in the middle with Malina at the end of the boat. The canopy stretched further across the sky and surrounded them in secrecy and isolation. Further and further they paddled until they arrived at their desired crabbing spot, and immediately started sorting through their equipment, preparing for today's catch. The jungle air is always heavy with humidity, and today was no different, but there was something else in the air that morning. The boat was very close to the banks and would be easy to get out of to hunt for crabs, but the unusual odor that drifted on the air brought caution to the minds of the group. They decided to paddle further out and away from the bank. Unbeknownst to the trio, they were not alone on this morning's journey. There was an observer sleeking silently in the bush alongside the group as they slowly paddled upstream. The observer had been following them for quite some time, hoping they would get close enough to the bank to allow for a lightning ambush. Patience is a valuable trait when you are one of the world's most fierce predators. The group changed the angle of their canoe and began to paddle toward the middle of the creek when all hell broke loose. Malina looked up soon enough to see a dark orange blur streaking toward the boat from the bank. She screamed, "Dada, bug!" which means tiger. Jyotish saw the blur pass him as he was frozen in fear. The tiger launched itself from the bank and landed on top of his father, Sushil. His father's legs were poking out from under the gigantic cat and were kicking all over, trying to get away. It took a few seconds for the dire situation to register to Jyotish before he searched around to find a stick, and Malina grabbed a jungle machete. The pair began attacking the tiger, but their strikes went completely ignored by the ravenous beast. The tiger clamped its jaws on Sushil's neck over and over until it got a good grip. Then it jerked its head back to flip his now limp body over onto its back. It next launched itself over the edge of the boat and landed on the bank with Sushil's body in its mouth. Brother and sister watched as the muscular beast disappeared into the dark forest with their father's body clenched in its jaws. Traumatized by the sight, Malina fainted as Jyotish yelled to signal nearby fishermen, who hastily paddled toward them. None of the people chose to follow the tiger into the jungle for fear of becoming its next meal themselves. Jyotish quickly began paddling his sister and their canoe back to safety to contact authorities. Neither the family nor the authorities made any attempt to, nor are optimistic about the recovery of Sushil's body. The hard reality of living in Bengal tiger habitat is something the indigenous people of the area have dealt with for thousands of years and will likely continue dealing with for the foreseeable future. Surviving widows of a man who's killed by a tiger are often ostracized in Indian culture due to the belief of the attack being caused by bad luck from the wife. I would love to read your thoughts on this episode in the comments below, and make sure to be safe, as you never know when an animal might be watching you.